Good morning. Welcome to the Carlton Whitehead Distinguished Leadership Speaker Series and to our special webinar today on diversity in storytelling, the power of culture. My name is Atul Parvatiyar, and I'm very happy that you have joined in, and I am delighted to welcome all of you on behalf of the Rawls College of Business, as well as on behalf of the Carlton Whitehead Leadership Speaker Series. I know people have joined in from various places, including from Australia, India, Europe, Canada, and the US. So good morning to all of you who are in the Central Time Zone or in the Pacific Time Zone or Mountain Time Zone. Good afternoon to those of you who are still in the Eastern Time Zone or from Europe. And good evening to people who are from Asia. And I really do not know what to say to people from Australia. Good morning or good evening. So welcome. And today we have a remarkably accomplished, but at a very young age, she's accomplished quite a few things as our distinguished speaker, and Jasmine Cogdell. And before I introduce her formally to all of you, let me first and foremost also introduce our Dean Margaret Williams. Dean Margaret Williams has been the Dean of the Rawls College of Business for over 5 years now. It's the sixth year. She has been Dean at many other places. Prior to that, she's a professor of management, a distinguished professor of management, and a great leader. Over to you, Dean Margaret Williams, for your welcome remarks.
Thank you, Atul. First, I want to thank Professor Carlton Whitehead and his family for their generous support of this Distinguished Leadership Series. We appreciate the support that you provide to the program. I also want to thank Dr. Atul Parvatiyar. I think we began this series during the pandemic, and it proved very popular. So I'm really pleased that you're continuing to provide these opportunities, not only for our community here at Rawls College and Texas Tech, but for people from around the world to hear these exciting and informative speakers. I'm particularly excited to join the webinar today. Storytelling is very important, and I don't consider myself to be a good storyteller. So as I was thinking about my introductory comments today, I was thinking about two things. The first is I found myself in a situation a couple of weeks ago where in front of a group, we were doing strategic planning, where I spontaneously started telling a story. And I got to the end of it. And well, I'll tell you the story because it's brief. We're interviewing candidates for the Dean of the College of Engineering here at Texas Tech. And we were doing standard 1-hour Zoom interviews. And we told each candidate, please allow some time at the end so you can ask questions of us. And most of the people didn't allow much time for questions. And there was one candidate who did save time for questions. We got to the end of the interview and we said, well, do you have any questions you have for us? I mean, typical questions are things like, well, what are the challenges at your university? Things like that. And he looks and he goes, well, who are your strongest partners? And everybody on the committee just took a step back and thought, wow, that's an excellent question. So I was telling this story to the Strategic Planning Committee, and I realized you could hear a pin drop. They were listening, and then they said, well, what's the answer? What's the answer? And I said, well, everyone needs to have their own answer to that question. To me, that was the answer. But as I reflected on it, I thought, well, that's a demonstration of why even very simple stories can be so powerful. And what I also recognize is not everyone has the opportunity or the stage to tell those stories or for those stories to be heard. And so I hope I can learn more about that from today's speaker. I've also been thinking about Mr. Harry Belafonte, who I think passed away yesterday is when I heard the news at the age of 96. And even though this is not my webinar, I think in some ways I would like for the Rawls College to maybe dedicate the next hour and a half, sorry, I forget the time, the next time frame to his memory and all that he did over the course of his career to elevate the stories of communities that typically who have not always had their voices heard in our society. So I just wanted to mention those two thoughts. And Jasmine, we're very excited to have you here today. Atul, thank you again for bringing this opportunity to us. And doctors Andrea Romai and Alejandra Marin, I also appreciate your willingness, especially at this very busy time of year, to jump in and moderate this session. So thanks to everyone. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Dean Margaret Williams, and you're a great storyteller. The way in which you told this in a captivating story itself indicates that you're a great storyteller. Not only you're a great leader, you're a great storyteller as well, and as very visible there. And once again, I think the idea of storytelling is very important, and to be able to tell story from an authentic perspective, that means being a native and tell the native story itself is very important, which our distinguished speaker today is going to talk about. But let me first introduce our two moderators, my colleagues, Dr. Andrea Romai. She is a professor of accounting, and she also focuses on diversity as well as sustainability, as well as in terms of feminine methodologies for conducting research. So she has great credentials in the space of diversity. So she will be one of the moderators, and joined by my colleague, Dr. Alejandra Marin. Dr. Alejandra Marin, she is a marketing professor, and she is focused a lot on developmental and as well as entrepreneurial marketing activities. And she has been also a co-moderator on a number of sessions on women in sales leadership that we have hosted in the past. So I welcome our two moderators, and let me also introduce first and foremost our distinguished speaker today. As I mentioned, that she has done remarkably well despite her very young age. Pardon my saying this a few times, but there is a reason why I'm saying it, because her professor, who is a distinguished professor herself, Joanne Serino, who introduced me to Jasmine, she at one time was also my student. So I have got a reason to say that there is a two-stage generational kind of linkage there. But Jasmine, she graduated from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in a degree in journalism with specialization in PR. Today, she is the Chief Operating Officer and Head of PR at Blacktag. She'll talk more about Blacktag. She has worked for other organizations, including BBDO, a major advertising and research agency, branding agency in New York. She also worked with one of the very leading and very prominent creative organizations, Wyden and Kennedy in New York, where she advised on brand strategy and creative development for clients such as Vitamin Water, HBO, Lyft, Verizon, Bloomberg, and Equinox. Having observed a lack of Black representation within the industry, Jasmine made it her mission to create space for Black voices to be amplified within the creative industry, and advised Wyden and Kennedy, New York, on how to establish systems and processes to better support Black creatives. She's co-founded NOIR, which was a group within Wyden and Kennedy, which focused on the Black talent pool within the agency. After 6 years, she left Wyden and Kennedy to serve as the Chief Operating Officer of Blacktag, where she continues her passion of advocating for Black creatives and working to change the landscape of the media industry. She has got both creative as well as PR skills, and she's a great storyteller. Let's welcome Jasmine Cogdell. And Jasmine, we'll start with you with your initial presentation before I request our distinguished moderators to join in and ask you some tough questions thereafter.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Wanted to make sure my mic is working good.
Very good.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'm Jasmine. Hello. I'm going to start screen sharing, have a little presentation. We'll talk for a little bit, and then go from there. All right, I'm assuming we're live. We're good to go. Okay, great. So diversity in storytelling, the power of culture. I kind of chose this topic because it really summarizes my, I guess you can say, past decade or so of work that I've been able to do within this space. It also kind of represents the future of where I'm going, and we'll get into that. So hello, I'm Jasmine. Hi, I am DMV raised. If you don't know what that means, it is not the car automobile place. It is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So I am from Silver Spring. So anyone who's from the Montgomery County area, I am a Tar Heel. Sorry, Duke fans, but I am a Tar Heel. Traveler, amateur chef, music lover. I'm a Sade aficionado. If you don't know who Sade Adu is, get hip, Google it. And I'm a Taurus. My birthday is in 2 weeks, hence the candle nod there. And a nod to my dad. He actually passed in 2018, and he is a part of the story and the journey as well, in terms of where I am today and who I am. So yeah, I love to start with a little preface. I am a very outspoken, energetic person, and I want to set the stage for what this conversation is about. I'm not sure where everyone's coming from, but I hope you walk away with something that kind of pushes you forward in terms of whatever it is that you're doing in your life's journey or work. I preface that I can only speak my truth as a Black woman in media. However, I believe that my truth also represents the truths of other marginalized groups, because again, when we say diversity, it obviously doesn't just represent Black Americans, it represents Latinos, LGBTQ+, women, Asian Americans, etc. So just acknowledging, although I'm focusing on Black Americans, I do believe that's where we start. And from there, the ripple effect continues to trickle down for change. Uncomfortable truths lead to better outcome. There are definitely topics and conversations that might be uncomfortable, but I think that as you'll learn in a lesson for life, you have to go through things in order to be able to see the other side. And in the words of Wyden, I definitely know that healthy debate and challenges breeds the best work. Another preface I'm going to have is Black culture impacts global culture. It sets the standard, it is the standard, so therefore it has to be addressed and discussed in a way giving value to the impact it actually has. Culture is also community. There is no culture without the people that it serves. And that's something that will be reflected in a lot of the conversations we have today when it comes to storytelling, which goes into the last topics, passing the mic. We've heard this before, but it's even more evident now as we get into the creator economy and also the whole notion of de-influencing, but passing the mic to those who actually have lived the experiences and can speak their truths is what's going to lead to the best authentic connections. And equity, the fight for equity, honestly, is going to be centered around building a more sustainable ecosystem. We'll get into that later, but just calling out that I'm going to dive into a few key elements that actually work with what this ecosystem that we all live in media, community, which is connected to consumers, and culture, which I believe is connected to creativity, because without art, without creativity, without inspiration, without stories, that is what is fueling essentially trends, perception, and ultimately culture. So my favorite quote I'm going to start off with by the good old Malcolm X. The media is the most powerful entity on earth because they control the minds of the masses. I also added the logo that you can see on the upper right-hand corner from Ghetto Film School. If you have not heard of them, you do know now. They are a nonprofit based out of the Bronx, New York. I had the privilege of working with them for 4 years while I was at Wieden and Kennedy. They are a school dedicated to championing diverse voices in film. So they partner with local kids from Bronx, New York, all underrepresented, so all Black and Latino kids from high school on up, and they actually pair them with mentors such as Spike Lee, and all Martin Scorsese are on the board to be able to give them opportunities to tell their stories. And we use this quote a lot when we talked about Ghetto Film School and what the power that the media has. And when we say media, that's anything that is pushed out, that is able to be consumed. So at the current stage, it obviously is digital and internet and social, but it has always kind of remained the same across different entities. And we'll get into that. History repeats itself. I think, as you guys can see, a lot of these references should be familiar to most people on the phone. If they're not, they span a lot, but I put this here collage because it shows a representation of probably, the last few hundred years. You have everything from the birth of the civil rights movement was honestly pushed out because of being able to see what has happened. And then you continuously have certain things hitting and missing the mark, all the way to, I love the cell phone image in the hand, because that is what we are today in 2023, but it doesn't stop from where it originally started. And I think that when you talk about media and you talk about advertising, and you talk about stories and you talk about what is out there to consume, it is dangerous to paint a singular picture that has not evolved with where life and where culture has continued to shape and shift. When you do so, you limit perception and you limit the ability for one to understand and to build other things, empathy, care, commitment, community, etc. Third pillar of that gets into community. It's been one hell of a few years. Notice my +2, I could add a 3. I think when everything happened, although Black Lives Matter has continuously been a thing since Trayvon Martin, we all know when George Floyd passed in 2020, pairing that with COVID, everything kind of shifted, I feel like, and turned, because people were sitting at home and had nothing to do but pay attention. There was no excuse to what was happening. So it sparked a lot within those who are in the system that are constantly serving outwardly messages. People that look like me, that were impacted by real life things happening, while still having to get on the call and listen to someone say, we need a brief, to make sure that we can say something about Black Lives Matter. And can you develop this ad to speak to this? And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? Oh, we just want them to know we're supporting. Okay, so are you giving money to anything? Is something else happening? Or are you just wanting to be a part of the conversation because you know that Black spending power is $1.6 trillion a year and you just want to make sure you keep your 5%? And then the room would go silent and no one was asking those questions. And so I think the reality became know your value, know your worth. And that leads me to Black artists, Black money. Black culture, Black nuance, Black creativity, Black art has shaped this country, this culture, this global economy for centuries, but yet it has never been valued or amplified or elevated or even given the position or the stage that it needs to. I think that this has really pushed forward and fueled the drive that I see, having been inside of the industry and seeing that the spend and where it's going, and also being a part of the culture myself as a Black woman. I've experienced these things. I live these things. This is me. This is who my family, my friends, and we want to share, and people do share and enjoy it. So why is it that there's still such a gap when it comes to progress as it relates to media perception, storytelling, perspective? Some figures that I've got ingrained in my head that I hope stick with you. And this is when we talk about sometimes the truth hurts. But the reality is creator economy wasn't even a word 5 years ago, I don't believe. It popped up, and that's just what happens within the industry changing, but it's already a $104 billion sector as of 2022. In addition, connecting that, 1.6 trillion is the spending power for Black Americans in the United States alone. And we know that Black creators drive Black consumption, but yet Black creators statistically get 29% less than their white counterparts on the exact same platforms. And there are ladies sounding off on TikTok and all the headlines you see here that somehow these programs and these commitments, these grants, these promises are not actually going anywhere. They're performative. The algorithms are purposefully choosing what is important to see or not. There's shadow banning. There is actual technology that is preventing people's voices from being heard and also being equitably compensated for the impact that they're giving. And that just leads to the whole fight for equity when you factor in that I mean, white American households are 84% difference between 4% for Black Americans, which is obviously a systemic issue that's continued, but we'll never be able to catch up. But yet brands spend $20 billion a year just on Black targeted media. And majority of that media also is thrown out in traditional sectors. Very limited are being funneled into digital placements, because the reality is there are very few digitally owned Black spaces where even these stories could live. So it becomes a whole cycle of an ecosystem that's failed. Brands spending enormous amounts of money. The people telling the stories where that money is going to aren't actually Black. It's being driven to Black consumers who have an enormous amount of spend, but then the money doesn't go back to the people that are impacting or driving it, and just becomes a circle that just is not sustainable. That kind of pushed out. I think there was a campaign done by Kenny St. George. He's actually one of our creative friends in our network, and he did a campaign coming out of everything that happened with George Floyd in 2020 that was kind of centered around, he called it Our Seat. And the fact of the matter is, we just talked about, you saw the factors and the numbers of how much media and how much money is being pumped in strictly just on advertising to Black people in America, but yet only 5%, it probably is also less now, but only 5% of people who identify as African-American make up the very industry that's pumping out billions of dollars a year to target those exact people. There's me. I'm part of the 5%. And my journey as part of that 5%, as you can see here, I actually started my internships at Ogilvy, went into BBDO and at Wyden. And over the course of those 10-ish years that I've lived and grown into there, my journey actually revealed my purpose. I think that this is also a life lesson. It's very crazy how the hardest moments in your life and the most challenging things, connection through this journey. I told you my dad had passed. There's a lot of things that happen in your life that you cannot predict that set you up to be in the exact place that you're supposed to be at the exact moment. And you may not know it yet, but just know that there cannot be light without darkness. And I think that the beauty of what has been able to come out of even my journey, and this was only in 2018, I created Noir. So it's very recent, the fact that this didn't exist in Wyden, New York at all, is something to be said, that I left that history and that impact there. So we started off with a group me of 20 people, and it expanded to an organization that now I think has like 90-ish or so people in just the New York office alone. And Noir actually was the first ERG that kind of took off in New York, that opened the door for agency, the LGBTQ community, the Latin American community, and all the multiple 4 or 5 ERGs that came after Noir. So the impact was kind of felt beyond just what we were doing, but it definitely started something that sparked a revolution within Wyden that has carried and continued to grow and carry forward and change the way they recruit, change the way they see creativity. Hire someone from Black Twitter to be a copywriter because they don't have to go to VCU ad school to be able to write a tweet for McDonald's. Look at something different and shake things up, and don't be afraid to diversify the voices in the room and empower them, so they're not just operations, or they're not just facilities, and they're not just comms, and they're not just a designer or a retoucher. So that kind of all funnels to the current landscape of what I'm doing now a little bit. I kind of talked about this before. It remains in the clear headlines clear as day, but Black creators crave spaces that are making them feel seen, and they're tired of questioning the sincerity of brands, the lack of support across platforms, the lack of just being able to have so much influence, but just not seeing the return, especially when a lot of people's livelihoods and businesses are now related and relying on clicks. And that's just where the world is going. We also learned with the evolution of Web3 going into NFTs and communities and all of that. Basically, it is true that the idea of like decentralization and having the community to be able to push forward change and to have something ownable is the future. And that wave of what happened, although the NFT market is still volatile and still moving forward, it's not going to go away. It's just shifted to AI, which a lot of you guys are seeing now. That will be the entry into full Web3, as it relates to that. But everything with technology that is happening is always a question of ownership, equity, and how is this going to close the gap and making sure that this community and other marginalized communities can continue to have their voices heard and are compensated and valued accordingly. So the problems that I kind of summarized here, Black creative power doesn't equate to economic power. The social platforms, we've talked about this, they don't exclusively are built for, and they're limited or not dedicated to Black culture. And brands who are trying to reach Black audience in digital spaces impactfully is just difficult. Black channels that currently exist are conventional. They kind of tell the same story. There's not enough. And they rely on problematic AI and bad algorithms with big social networks. And Black culture IQ is rigorous, it's complex, and it's diverse. Hence a solution. I came to Blacktag. It would be great to build a global platform for Black creators and Black culture where it serves as a hub for everything, both in front of the camera, behind the camera, the studios, the networks, the brands can have a place where we're all kind of driving into some place that's actually Black owned, that can actually represent the culture and that's actually built with equity and economic advancement in place. So this is Blacktag. It's kind of led me to this journey here as COO of this company. We are actually launching our product this fall, coming out in September. We've been in stealth mode for the past year and a half, building this technology. We are a VC-backed company, which also is an anomaly. I'm in the 1% of Black-owned VC-backed companies in the entire US. So I'm a double anomaly, which means that I have a lot of unique experience because there are very few people in the entire world that can sit in the exact position that I'm in. Hence my mission and vision. I believe that I'm sitting in this space because I have had the experience where I've championed my voice. Wyden gave me my power. Wyden gave me my voice. Wyden gave me my purpose. BBDO gave me my skills. BBDO gave me my tenacity, and BBDO gave me my aptitude. Blacktag is allowing me to do my global impact because this is beyond US. This is touching the world. This is facilitating investment, economic empowerment for Black art and culture worldwide, and being the largest network of creators in the world. So we can actually be a resource and authority for the Black creator economy as a whole. Because the reality is the Nielsen reports and the McKinseys consistently use Facebook data that says that I love and hip hop Atlanta, and I don't. And that's just not true. So that is what CPG and Fortune 500 companies use to build those $20 billion media plans, but they're all just going to the BET channel in essence, because that's what Nielsen and McKinsey say I watched, but no one's actually able to measure culture because the algorithms on the platforms can't identify me as Black because they can't ask me if I'm Black. So what they do is they go off of my likes. But as we know, Black is not a monolith. So how can you put together an archetype based on what perception is when also there's not even enough media in the world that is showcasing the diversity of what Black culture can be? Hence why building a network of 600 that we hope grows to 15,000 Black creators all over the world that is curated specifically by Blacktag that represent alternative Black artists and audiences who are dynamic, who are unconventional, who are into anime, who are into farming, who are into bird watching, who are into rodeo. Not everything is hip hop, not everything is, like I mentioned, barbecue food, cooking shows. Like we have so much diversity and voices that need to be heard and seen. And those are what is going to drive the future of content for the world. And Blacktag is kind of servicing that by manually doing services here. I'm in my studio. But we're just constantly pushing out and building intentional, authentic relationships with brand partners until our tech is out in the world. Being able to be a cultural conduit and a bridge to make sure that that connection is being more seamless and you're driving forward those conversations. And that is Blacktag in my story. I'm gonna stop screen sharing real quick as we pull up a content reel just to kind of show you guys what it could look like when you have Black people behind.
So then who's the baddest then?
Oh my God.
There you go.
Jasmine, thank you so much. This is wonderful and exciting for me. I think one of the things that I do in research is look at the use of authentic storytelling in building power toward systemic change, right, or system level change. One of the things I would be interested to get your perspective on is how authentic storytelling in your viewpoint not only influences marginalized communities, especially Black communities, but also has the power to change the misperception or the association that we might have as white individuals or less marginalized individuals toward these types of communities. What can they learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's evident in what's already kind of happening. I mean, you see successes like Crazy Rich Asians and Everywhere, Everything. I forget the last one. It's another E. It went off Oscars. Abbott Elementary. You see things Insecure. The reality is like we're coming into a space where I think we have no choice but to do that. Unfortunately, that's just where we're at because it's taken this long to get there. I mean, the fact that we just had an Abbott or we just had an Insecure to that extent, or we just had these things means that, like I said, the world is coming to a place, I think, especially because of the instances that have happened with the economy and just in general, what's happened with markets. And I think with perception, and there's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of this life that has happened that has forced the world to change, as well as technological advancements. So I think combining all of that together means you have to change the system or else the system will just blow up and not work. And there's just comes a point where that revolution is now. So either it's going to be televised or it's not. And it already is televised because we all have a phone. So that's another thing. I think historically we've relied on traditional TV media, which has limited the access to culture being exposed. And with the evolution of technology, it no longer is hidden and is no longer having to fight as much for it to be seen. I mean, the average age in Nigeria is 19, the whole 19. So just put that in perspective of what's going to happen. Everyone talks about Gen Z, everyone talks about the evolution, but the reality is that we are the ones having to catch up to what's already happening. And I think that the only way that the world, looking back 50 years from now, because what I'm doing is not for my generation. And I always said that when I was building Noir, this isn't for me. What I'm doing right now is for 10 years from now. And that's actually what happened. I've been gone from Wyden now since 2021. And I go back and I don't know anyone. Not a single soul, but people will just be like, are you Jasmine? Did you start Noir? I came to Wyden because they had Noir. And I was like, really? They're like, yeah, like you don't know this, but like you're the reason I'm a CD. Like, I was like, oh, I'm the reason that Wyden, New York hired their first Black CD in 20th century. Okay, got it. And that is something that is a systemic change because that then carries over. So now he's the CD on McDonald's. And they're the reasons why the Travis Scott campaign are coming out and that culture is being out there and that systems are changing. Like that's why Wyden's at CultureCon, recruiting Black creators, exposing, creating programs like the Kennedys, extending that. These are systemic things that happen just because you push forward a door because it has to be pushed open.
Great, thank you. Very insightful. So there are some large companies, right, that are trying to partner with marginalized groups. I know one of them, I'm sure you're familiar, Budweiser recently partnered with the trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney, and they received a huge amount of criticism for doing so and a significant stock market hit for it, and then backtracked somewhat, right? So if you were in the room with their executives who made these initial decisions and are now like trying to figure out what to do, what advice would you give them? Did they do it the right way? Did they not do something correct? What advice would you have?
This is a great question because it actually came up a lot when the companies would come to us, especially as Blacktag, at their what was going on with things. And I always said, well, what did you do before? It's the first question I always ask. What'd you do before this? And they would always pause and I'd be like, okay. And then I'd say, and so why would I care that? Why should I care that you're doing this now? And then I always ask the questions like, what is this going to mean for the long term? And if those three answers don't kind of culminate into something that could lead to a strategy that would actually drive more authenticity, then I say it always misses the mark. I think that there is a way to champion and there's a way to push forward. And also there's a way to stick up and say, I actually don't care if we lose 2% market share. You know why? Because that's what we're going to do. That's what we're sticking by and we're going to stick with it. Because the reality is, especially as I'm telling you, 10 years from now, what's going to happen is Nike's going to give away 1% of their ownership to consumers because that is going to be how their company stays valuable and liquid. And it's going to be done through Web3. Like that is, I said it down here, but that's where life is going. And you have to keep up. I had this conversation at South by Southwest, I think the first year it came back with an exec at Disney. And we were talking about this exact same thing of just ownership and just this notion of like, what's going on here. And are you afraid to say things or make commitments to lose other things as a business? Where do you stand on that line? And I think you as a company need to know what that answer is first before anything else.
Great. I agree with you completely. That transitions nicely. I could ask you a million questions, but I have about time for about one more. So how does that work for you personally, right? So the kind of work that you do, right? And I found myself in this space before. You have to decide how important something is to you and how hard you are willing to fight for it. Is this something I'm willing to lay down for or I'll leave? And so those are sometimes difficult decisions that are very stressful on people. How do you deal with those types of situations?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing I've learned is like no decision is a bad decision because even a bad decision teaches you something that you were supposed to get out of it. So I think the first thing is relieving the pressure of that is also the key thing. And I think outside of that, it's listening to your intuition and gut and just knowing what your value or worth is and your long-term goal. Is it going to get me closer to that? Is it not? Is it going to make a statement? Is it going to make an impact towards that? And also not being afraid to let something go if it doesn't exactly fit with what you were trying to do. And I think I just got really bold because there's just so much money being wasted and circulated that I kind of was like, if you can spend $500,000 on a re-edit, maybe I just don't care and I can say this isn't going to work. And I think I just kind of was able to do that. And I don't really think people had much to say after it because they knew it was true deep down, but they just were trying to do what they were told is usually what it is, or trying to fit within the rules or what box has normally been checked. And I think we will continuously have these conversations until we say, let's just change it completely. Forget a box. It's not even a box anymore. It's a drop-down menu. Someone just has to go and change the way we're thinking and not use the excuse of systems or things that have been done in the past to validate why something can't be altered and not be afraid to change that.
Great. Yeah, I can see why you motivate people to do things. I can see why you've paved the path. As fascinating as I think this is and all this work is, you do have a very interesting career path as well. And so I'll turn it to Dr. Marin, who will then spend a little bit more time asking you questions about that specifically.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. And before getting into this question, Andy's question in terms of your voice, your and all your own voice, I think is great segue. I want to remind our audience, and I think we have a couple of questions, but yes, we will have time to receive some of the, or hopefully most of the questions posted. So please post your questions for Jasmine in our Q&A. So yeah, continuing with our conversation, we would like to hear a little bit more about your journey and about the role, and I guess redundant, but the role models that affected you in your journey, and also your upbringing, how those two things are playing a role in your development.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I actually didn't even know how to answer this question until I started at Blacktag, which is very funny because I've been the most challenged at Blacktag because it's a startup. I'm one of 4 employees, just for context and scale. But we have a big network because we outsource everything to our creator network. But I think the biggest thing that, I guess I'll start with my upbringing. My dad was actually in computer science and tech, which honestly comes back around because now I'm in a tech company. So that's why I said homage. Didn't know that at the time. My mom actually didn't go finish college, I don't think. She kind of just went straight into, but she always helped people. She worked actually for Department of Social Services. She was actually helping people get on welfare and food stamps. But she also grew up in Baltimore. And my family is very, outspoken and all strong women. And I'm also the only girl out of all boy cousins. And so I found myself in a situation where I was center of attention, but also had to use my voice and use whatever kind of came at me to be able to dive in head first. And I really got that tenacity, I think, from my mother. She, no filter, she's a strong woman. She'll tell you how it is, but she's the oldest of 6. And that's where that came from. And so, and I also feel like I have a little civil rights in me. Fun fact, my 3rd cousin is Ella Baker. She started the SL Student Nonviolent Committee alongside Martin Luther King back in the civil rights movement. So I think just I have some blood and some things in me that was always like not afraid to speak up. But I wasn't always like this. When I started my career, I was ingrained in me, especially as a woman of color, in this instance that I just needed to get it done and just make sure I had a job, and that I wasn't trying to ruffle any feathers, wasn't trying to disturb too much, like didn't want to like get too bold, even though I would hear things and I would be like, that sounds weird. I kind of just was like, know my place, let me get in, let me get out. But then over time, I think I just kind of got to a point where my confidence grew because as my successes grew and I was really good at what I could, accomplish. And, I was very diligent, and I made a point to believe in people, not the system. I built relationships throughout my whole career. My first day of work, I wanted to know all the way down to the lowest level job you could have. I would sit for an hour and just ask, what is it that you would need from someone like me to help you do your job better? And how could I serve you, in a sense, vice versa, you to me? And those relationships, even down to the traffic business affairs manager, doesn't matter that you were a CD. I didn't care your title. Everybody was equal because we all play a part in like a symphony to make something happen. And those relationships, those people, that community is what got me to my career. Because at 2 a.m., is your traffic manager going to sit on the phone with you to make sure the spot gets aired by 4? Or you just would lose out on $1 million on a media buy. But if I had never built that relationship with Sonia and she trusts me as a person, you know what I mean? And I took the time to not think I'm better than her. And she was a Dominican woman from the Bronx. And most people would push aside her, but she actually had the most power. And so I think those lessons in humanity and life has shaped me as a person and who I am just in general. And it led me to be in rooms and be in places that I grew the confidence to say, well, I'm in this room for a reason. I'm not afraid. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to push the box a little bit here and see what I can shake up. And it worked out for me. And I think when you do that, especially when you do it from a genuine place, things just happen.
Right. I think one of my questions was about your leadership style, but I guess you are sharing with us now the idea of talking to people, being genuine and listening, trying to help others to do their goals, so you can also kind of as a community benefit. In terms of your, and I don't want to call it challenges, but in terms of the one, when you feel like, oh my gosh, how do I overcome this? How do you get that strength, and how do you keep pushing it and keep doing what you are trying to do? Where does it come?
Yeah.
That is strength.
It's actually more of a mental game than you think. I never was like this person that like meditated or just like tried to get myself into a quiet space. But like, as you can imagine, I'm a COO of a startup in the middle of a recession. So that tells you the level of stress I already have on my plate. But in order to kind of like survive, I've learned that I can't focus on the feeling of what I'm in, but rather focus on the feeling of where I know I want to be, and just have the confidence in that I will get there and not stress on how exactly that will happen. And when I focus and just kind of like acknowledge how I'm feeling, acknowledge the anxiety, acknowledge the stress, acknowledge it because it's a part of the journey. But that journey is, I use this analogy that someone told me that I constantly stick on my head. In your life, it's one road. It's windy, it's hilly, but it's only one road. Where I'm at on that road right now may be a stormy rain hurricane. But if I take 5 feet, I'm still on the road, but it was sunny. And that's just going to happen throughout your entire life until you are gone. But it was always the one road. Just different parts of your journey on that road will have storms. But you can't not go through those storms because you have to get to the destination. And again, the journey is the destination, because as you go through the storms and the sun and the storms and the sun, you start to remember, well, I got through that thing before last time. Somehow this is going to work out. Somehow I didn't know we were going to be able to pay that. And next thing I know, we got an RFP. Somehow that client thing failed. And I had to figure out how to get a boat secured with a permit with the Coast Guard. This is a true story. In 48 hours, somehow it happens, you know? Those types of things are literally, you remind yourself that's happened before, it's going to happen again. And I think like that's kind of the energy I've had to have. And best believe it, when you focus your mind and your spirit on just like the feeling you want to have when you're accomplishing that thing, and not just like, I want this check, I want this money, but more of like, oh, I want to feel abundant. I want to feel powerful. I want to feel impactful. I want to feel, you know, I want to feel accomplished today. I want to feel, those are the feelings you sit on, and literally the universe will bring it to you. Because if you sit in that, I don't know what's going to happen, this isn't, I'm worried, that's the energy you're attracting. So it's kind of like you either are going to sit in that energy that you're attracting, or you're going to choose to get out of that. Yeah.
And this is loving your journey, this idea of one journey, one road. This is, that's great. Very, very inspirational. I guess my last question before giving it to Atul, in terms of the future of advice for young professionals that are starting their careers in similar, of course, we are in a business school. I am in the marketing department. So as a young people are thinking about their own roads, what advice could you give us about the future paths that they are taking and how to take those paths?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like continue what you're passionate about, be ingrained in what you want to get into, like be the expert in what it is that you want to change is also something that's important. And know that not every single step is exactly what you think it's going to be. Like I was working on Mobile One Oil at BBDO, selling mobile Delvac to truckers for 2 years. Did not think that that's what was about to happen to get me here. but that was the opportunity that presented itself into my lap. And the things I took from that got me here. So I always say, especially for young professionals, like sometimes everyone wants that like sexy job or like that sexy thing, but you have to sometimes think long-term and sometimes be strategic of like, what can I get out of this that's gonna benefit me in the long run? And network, build your relationships, because I'm not here sitting if it wasn't for people who have helped me get here, whether that was through, I always say, getting me hip, telling me what I need to know, informing me I'm underpaid by $20,000, true story, informing me, hey, you actually might want to ask for this, informing me like, actually, this is what happens. If you don't kind of establish yourself with a network of people that have your best interests at heart or that you can be motivated and inspired by, you could be left behind or steered away. So, you know, just find your community, find your people, and yeah, embrace that journey that I said, even when there's rain and all that.
Awesome. Jasmine, thank you so much. Atul, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really, really impressed with the journey you've gone through, Jasmine. And there are several questions that have come up from the audience. Before I take that up, you know, I was really struck by the statistics and numbers that you were sharing, particularly given the fact that the Black spending power is $1.6 trillion, and the brands are spending almost $20 billion a year. But what goes back to the community, the Black community, is only 5% of the American creative people are Blacks, and that only 4% of the wealth is shared by the Black household. So my question to you in this regard is the fact that I also like what you did in creating a platform to actually unlock the potential of people. So how can we create a greater unlocking of the potential so that, excuse me, the involvement of the people is larger in the overall creative activity? You know, I like the idea that, you know, you involve the authentic native community in the creative activity, and particularly with regard to the brand story and brand building. So what can be done? Is it a people issue? Or is it a platform issue, in your opinion?
It's a both. And unfortunately, like, I mean, where we're at right now as society is technology runs everything. And technologies are wide on platforms. And the also reality is that creators and communities also drive content. So I think the entire industry has shifted in the last decade. And so the only real way to close the equity gap is to build new systems and platforms that serve the people it's intended to serve and invite everyone in to be able to kind of like outwardly have a larger reach. I do know and firmly believe that the advancement of technology in intersection with creativity will help close the wealth gap, because of the fact that that is, for example, African Americans were kind of left out of the evolution of Web 2. What happened with the internet basically being created? That's where you have a lot of the large established big giant platforms were built on during that time. In between that, now that the world is going into Web3, there's an opportunity where we can actually be a part of it and not be left behind in this large technical evolution that's going to carry the world over the next decades. And so that's never happened, because we all know why it never happened before the 2000s and before that. And you have 400 to 500 years of systemic issues, as well as slavery. But that was what kind of has taken everything back by decades and decades and decades and decades. And you'll never be able to catch up until we have this like large evolution, which is currently happening in this very moment. So it's an amazing time for all of us to be alive, for all of us to be intergenerationally connected in this journey, for all of us to be in community, to all of us to experiment, to change, because we're in a moment that will probably not happen again. For a very while. We're in this very interesting time where you still have people alive without the telephone, who didn't have telephones, and people who were born with it at the age of 2. So it's like there's this dynamic that exists right now culturally that did not exist 50 years ago. And so I think that alone is cause for why technology cannot be left out of the conversation and is the way forward for building more equitable and more sustainable is the key word that's happening here. And it will only be sustainable if you build it with purpose.
It
And
makes
I
a lot
just
of
believe,
sense.
yeah.
Transformation with purpose probably is, the key word that I'm taking away from you is transformative purpose. Is not merely kind of doing things, but transformative purpose makes a lot of difference. And transformative culture is most important. Now you have a question, there are a couple of questions from the audience. So let me take one. The first one from Saloni Sinha, I guess she is logged in from India. She's saying, greetings to all. This is Saloni from India. Interesting insights, Jasmine. Curious to know the story behind the naming of your venture, Blacktag. With AI and avatars and fake identity on social media, how can one ensure authentic storytelling?
Very true. That's another thing. Sometimes you can't. But the name Blacktag, it was intentional to be able to separate out and say, we're going to focus on Black creativity because we believe it should be valued at a space and a level that it deserves its own platform. That was a bold thing to do and say, and it's something we stick by because it is something that we believe will be transformative, like we were speaking in terms of the change in the future and establish a more equitable system. When it comes to the creators on our platform, you actually have to apply to be a Blacktag creator. You create a profile, and from there we curate the creators on our profile. However, that only means those creators have permissions to publish. Everyone else has the ability to join Blacktag as an audience or as a brand or a network or a studio. Doesn't matter what your kind of identification is from a race perspective. And that's what the beauty is of diversity and community, right? Bringing in community, but also giving the publishing rights to those we've curated with a Black perspective. And that is how we're kind of maintaining the control of that. It's not meant to be it is a social app, but it's not intended to be a scrolling forever genuous feed. It's intentional programming with intentional storytelling with a purpose to facilitate economic advancement. So you're giving creators tools to build their businesses, to build their communities, to build e-com. You're honestly giving them the ability to have access to brands, and you as an audience are able to be a part of that community, to engage with that e-com, to be a part of those, conversations, and also to discover people you've never seen across the entire world.
Wonderful. There's another question from actually related to advertising from Eric Waugh. What is the most recent advertisement or marketing campaign you have seen that did well in incorporating diversity into its messaging? Why do you think it did well? If you have time, maybe an example of one that missed the mark and what could have gone wrong.
Well, the ones missed the mark, you check that slide, a lot of have and continue to do. I think the ones that have done well, I love what, I think WhatsApp did it with Giannis and his jersey and they could partnered it together and they created something as they were launching NBA Africa, as well as I think Procter & Gamble did a campaign where they were kind of putting on into who was shooting behind the scenes in order to represent and change the narrative in front of it. I love those things because it actually also put a spotlight on the creators, the filmmakers that were actually driving the storytelling and the directorial debut of some of these people. I recently have done a campaign with Johnny Walker. And in that campaign, we did a grant program to filmmakers, but I challenged them to take it a step further and they accepted, and it became a mentorship that lasted over a year, a mentorship that, actually gave impact and actually elevated and celebrated beyond just writing a check. So I think the more that brands have long-term partnerships and commitments, we like to call them mentorships at Blacktag, the better the impact it's going to be. And those are the campaigns that I look out for.
Right. Involvement makes a lot of difference, right? There's one question from Sudesh Srivastava in India. I'm Sudesh from India. Have a couple of small questions. How difficult is it to survive and actually grow as a Black woman in the marketing communication business in the US as compared to a white woman or a white man or a Black man? For other non-Black minorities, marginalized communities, how difficult or easy it is?
Yeah, It can be very difficult. When I started, I was the only Black account person, I think, in my department, at least at a level that had some level of seniority. I think that I had challenges with microaggressions, things that people don't really know are happening. There's certain things that a lot of times there's naive, and there's a lot of ego in the creative industry, which is something that you just kind of need to understand from the jump. Creatives are sensitives and creatives have egos. I don't care what color or what gender you are. And so I think being able to also acknowledge that empathy, but also sticking up for like, we're on the same team and I don't work for you. That also is something to be bold about. So I think in combination with my voice and in combination with, I wasn't afraid of, setting my value of who I am and what I bring to the table in that room, allowed me to get further and further in my career because people trusted that if they gave me something, Jasmine will carry it through and I don't need to worry about it. And that elevated me in terms of my growth because my actions match the words coming out of my mouth.
Even though we are out of time, there is one question that I cannot miss asking this because this is a very provocative question to you. It's an anonymous attendee who's asking the question, since you're pushing for the black tag for African-American creators, how does this affect other races like Latino, Asian, Indian? Do this tag and push for Black creators for recognition take away more light away from other races? And if so, why?
I don't think so. Like I said before, when I started Noir, I actually helped guide how agency started, which was another ERG, and the leader of that ERG actually pushed me aside and asked me, how did you do what you did with Noir? And I used my experience as a Black woman because Black culture is globally influential and has systemically been set back to a level of a degree that it deserves its own platform, that it deserves the investment that it has. And we're not afraid to kind of push that into it. And then hopefully it has a trickle down effect where other groups can continue to go and push in that fight in terms of that equity, because it has to start somewhere. And I do believe that the Black community and the Black culture is at the where we begin and where I can have the most impact because I'm a Black woman. If you are Hispanic or a Latino man, this should hopefully encourage you to start something for your community, because again, you can only speak to your truth. And I think that that's the most important thing to walk away from this. Nothing that Blacktag is doing is taking away from any other group, because all these other groups take from Black culture and vice versa. So I think it's a notion of being able to stand and what it is, the change that you're trying to make, because the economic crisis that's happening and the global wealth gap and disparity that exists is obviously being sounded off, and the cultural relevance that Black art is having, from Afro beats to everything within music, fashion, anime, art, has been ripped and basically taken for years and years and years. And it's time that we have our voices compensated for that. And that's just where we are as our community. I can't speak for your community.
I think it's a very, very valid point that it's not only a matter of output in terms of diversity, there has to be input in terms of diversity. And I think that's a very important point, that people from various communities have to create platform for themselves or for that community to be able to have an input in the overall process that takes place. I think that's the point that you're making, which is very important. Let me at this point in time, because we're out of time really, request Tara Whitehead Stotland. Tara is, again, she is part of the Carlton Whitehead family. She's the daughter of Professor Carlton Whitehead. And on behalf of the family, she wants to thank, and of course, I cannot miss this opportunity to say I was very fortunate at one time to be one of the professors for Tara Whitehead. And Professor Carlton Whitehead, of course, that was at Emory University. Professor Carlton Whitehead, her dad was a professor here at Rawls College of Business. So Tara is going to extend her thanks to everyone on behalf of the Carlton Whitehead family. Tara, over to you.
Yes, please. Jasmine, first and foremost, thank you so much for blessing us with your presence. It resonated so much with me just so you know, I happen to be a board member of a Black female-owned media company in Dallas. I'm based in Dallas, so but I also have the privilege of running a team at Cognizant that's called Greenlight Innovation. And one of my team members is on the call, Jen Hodby, who happens to be African-American, but she happens to also be one of our creative leaders for the team. So I really think that bringing all those different ideas together to create the story is what makes stories so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing. What a great way to start my day today. On behalf of my father, who's on the call, Carlton Whitehead, and my sister, Carla, who was not able to join today, we really appreciate Texas Tech for creating this forum, for my father for wanting to create this to raise up voices of women and minorities. So we really appreciate having you here, and we look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully at a future event at Tech.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Tara, and thank to you, Jasmine. Thanks to everybody, all my panelists. First and foremost, the Dean Dr. Margaret Williams, our two hosts, co-hosts, Dr. Andy Romy and Dr. Alanda Marine. And of course, behind the scene, the people who make all this happen is, of course, Lisa Beatoncourt, who is our marketing area manager, and she takes care of many things behind the scene. And then, of course, Matthew Winfrey and his team, including Nicholas there, who actually makes this whole thing look so professional. I want to thank all of you for this. And of course, thank all the attendees who attended today's session. We'll soon have it posted on our website. And Jasmine, you really triggered and a lot of thinking amongst us. And I surely believe that the transformative processes that you're recommending and what Blacktag is going to do will really raise the engagement and unlocking of potential of the tremendous, I believe, creative capacity that people in the Black community have. And I think that I want to thank you for creating such a forum and giving an opportunity to all the people who really need to kind of display and actually utilize their talent for this purpose. So thank you once again. And once again, thank you to the Carlton Whitehead family for their generous support for hosting this webinar. And I want to make a last announcement over here. Stay tuned with us because we are likely to have a major forum pretty soon, which will be on the, and probably this will be in person on global customer management, a symposium here at the Rawls College of Business. We are in the planning mode, but stay tuned. We will try and do that both in person and in virtual as well, which would be a major 1 or 2 day event. So stay tuned for that. So thank you once again. Dean Margaret, you want to say anything in closing, please?
Oh, pardon me. Did you say me?
Yes, I said, did you?
I'm sorry. I was just thanking Jasmine. So no, thanks again to everyone for a really enlightening time. And Jasmine, especially to you for sharing your time with us. Thank you so much.